So, and this actually, there's sort of, let's just put a button on that. So, with regards to the election, I think the argument in the debate that I'm much more in the sort of cynical camp in is that I think in 2016, I felt much more comfortable saying, okay, Bernie really opened up some space here. We'll see. I think in 2020, I think there's numerous lessons. And you know, some of this didn't come out of nowhere for me. I always thought it was going to be Bernie or Biden. And I think the appeal of Biden is, again, it's not my candidate, but I would encourage people watching this kind of content to sort of, you know, well, not literally stick their head out right now because of the pandemic, but talk to more people. And even if a lot of people don't necessarily love the guy, I mean, first of all, you might find some people that like the guy, and you'll also find plenty of people that just want things to calm down, period. That is their exclusive focus. And I think that some people, though, are confusing the necessity of getting Trump out of office, which I just don't question. I'm sorry. It's just not debatable to me. The guy needs to be defeated. With a sort of Pollyannish version of how things are progressing in the Democratic Party, which leaves out some huge gaps in terms of how power still works. And you know what, if I could just add as an addendum on this, I'd also really like, and I think this also really implicates the directionality of the protests as well. How quick do serious material, and I would say following Cornel West, just democratic demands. You need to have a democratic, you know, there cannot be paramilitary organizations that just terrorize communities because of their race or class position. That's a very elemental democratic demand. How quickly does that turn into, you know, corporate brand initiatives? Woke nonsense, the democratic leadership's coming to America moment. And so that we don't confuse, we're real about the state of the Democratic Party, even as we need to defeat Trump. And we don't confuse, I guess for lack of a better term, I wish I could think of something better, but I don't have time, symbolic for substantive progress.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, again, we're in agreement. I think that when you have a week left, and when that week left, also part of its weakness is the lack of an institutional presence in the form of organizations. What happens when you have a spontaneous eruption is that the demands of that spontaneous eruption are going to be interpreted by whoever is in the best position to interpret them. So if that is the owners of the Major League Baseball teams who want to now say Black Lives Matter, if it's Nike, they will start to do that. So to me, what that means, and it's something I've been beating the drum about for several weeks, is that we desperately need a People's Anti-Repression Coalition. We need something at the national level that brings together various organizations, new and old, with a clear stand against troops being deployed in our cities, a demilitarization, reorganization, rethinking of law enforcement, justice for those who have been lynched, and anti-austerity. And I would add to that voting rights.
Yes.
And that we need that kind of formation that basically takes the demands that are emerging out of the spontaneous movement. Because, you know, it's like, I'm tired of these debates about what does defund the police mean and what does abolish the police mean. Well, it means whatever the person who happens to be articulating it means, because there is no overall leadership that is saying this is the way you define it. I have a certain way of interpreting it, defunding police. And you're not going to abolish police. I mean, that's not going to happen. But I have a certain way of interpreting it.
He said it, not me, folks.
No, I mean, look, let's be real.
No, please be real. Please be
Yeah, no,
real.
there's no society on this planet that has no police.
Right.
And you can abolish capitalist policing when we get rid of capitalism. You can, under capitalism, however, introduce some major structural changes right now on law enforcement. And that's what we need to be doing. Allocation of money, what is handled by armed police, all of these things.
Right.
But at the end of the day, police ain't going to disappear.
Right. Of
And,
course.
and there will be.
That's why I won't say the slogan. I'm sorry. I'm responding to people who complain.
No, I'm
That's
with
why
you.
I won't say the slogan. Thank you. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean, look, Michael, I've gotten into arguments with people. My daughter was held up at gunpoint by someone a few years ago. Who was I going to call? Ghostbusters? I mean, like, who was going to handle this, right? A gun is pointed at her, which could have been used. What do? Argue that person politically? I mean, the reality is that there's going to be crime. There are kids that are being killed regularly in armed battles between gangs, right? So we got to do something about that. Now, part of that is about social work. Part of that is about community organizing, right? So we've got the progressive forces are going to have to interpret this and push forward the kind of structural changes that desperately need to happen. That's what we need to be doing right now.
Claim No Easy Victories, anthology co-edited by Bill Fletcher Jr. Yes, and I think that this is actually another thing that disturbs me because there is a parasitic relationship between a certain type of sloganeering which can be incentivized in social media spaces that can sound very radical because you're always sure. I mean, I can sit on social media and say whatever I want,
Right.
you know. And then because it's all ethereal, it actually, to me, has a parasitic relationship with, you know, that's the corporate woke branding. You know, that's the
Right.
same thing. Anybody can adopt any discursive strategy. But even, you know, I had on Cedric Johnson a couple weeks ago, and we had a great conversation, which included the race and class and geographic dimensions of this. And then the other really sickening paradox that my friend, you know, Waz first brought to me, which is like part of the experience of racist policing is constant harassment about nonsense and in certain neighborhoods, and then actually, frankly, a deep lack of interest in solving serious crimes.
Right.
That's a profound paradox that
Exactly.
isn't being contended with.
That's right. That's right. Well, there's, you know, see, one of the things that I have felt is that, and I raised it in this article I wrote in Indies Times about police unions and the whole debate about that.
Yeah.
Is that there needs to be a debate about what is the role of law enforcement in a democratic society. And I pose that in terms of what needs to happen in organized labor, a debate there. But I think that there's a broader social issue about what is the role of law enforcement. And you know, the entire military framework that we have seen since the 1960s, the disparate treatment when it comes to law enforcement that you could see going back certainly to the beginning of this country, but I'm thinking, for example, about the actual origins of Chinatowns, that Chinatowns and the long association in the mainstream media of Chinatowns with crime was a direct result of white society segregating Chinese into these ghettos and permitting certain kinds of criminal activity to exist there, particularly criminal activity that white men could participate in and then go back to their white wives and pretend like everything was cool, right? And so you've had this very different relationship to law enforcement that I think needs to be discussed at the level of society.
What are those steps? You have this great piece in The Nation that I'd recommend everybody read, five ways to rebuild labor and transform America. Can you get into the details of that, what that kind of strategic roadmap is?
Well, there's getting into that roadmap, and then there's actually implementing it,
Well,
right?
certainly.
Okay, so and I only raise that because, well, let's go into, so basically what I'm raising in here in this article um, is that the labor movement is paralyzed, and that first, that in this period of crisis with this pandemic, we unions have to respond to and defeat social Darwinism, because that is this, as we talked about in the beginning, this sort of overarching Republican framework for how to approach this plague. Second is that labor needs to recognize that the crisis is not just one for trade union members, but it's a crisis facing the working class and, population as a whole. Third, which relates to what I was just raising, unions must lead a coalition that opposes austerity. Because what's interesting, Michael, is that in the initial stages of the pandemic, when the economy started crashing, all of a sudden the Republicans found money until a certain point was hit when a few things happened. The result was McConnell said no more money. But what laid the foundation for that, as far as I can tell, was a demographic analysis of who was suffering from the pandemic. And when they basically established that it was mainly old people, people of color, particularly African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans, they became less interested. They're probably changing their tune now with what's happening in Florida and Arizona and Texas. Fourth, the unions must recognize that this is a time for massive worker organizing on a strategic basis. So it's not just hot shops, but it really is thinking about industries as a whole, like taking on Amazon, or going after more meatpacking facilities. And that fifth is that we've got to organize the unemployed. That when you have the kind of record numbers of unemployed people, one of the great lessons of the 20th century is that there's two segments of the population that you can't afford to leave unorganized. One of veterans and the second of the unemployed. Because if you do, the right wing will organize them and they can become literally an army at the behest of the right. Now, so those are some of the things that I was advocating. The challenge, though, is that we really desperately need a new leadership echelon within organized labor because the paralysis is so deep. After the Trump election in 2016, the national AFL-CIO, it just went blank. There was like nothing. And they, leading into that, there had been all these discussions that had been underway about race, and discussions ended. You have a fragmentation, you have unions that are looking out for themselves. And so I think we are in a situation where we desperately need formations like Jobs with Justice, which is a coalition of unions and community groups. We need some insurgencies, Michael. There's no other way to put it. We need to toss up, we need to send into retirement a lot of these leaders because they really are not getting that this is a different moment. It's
Right.
not like you can wait for the pendulum. Because here's the other thing. This assumption that many people seem to have that an election of Biden, should he be elected, that the pendulum will go back the other way. No, we should learn from what happened under Obama. That if there is insufficient pressure on these guys, they are going to go to their comfort level, just like Obama did, and try to appease these the forces on the right, and to appease corporate America, and to try to lead people to believe that there's a way of returning to so-called normality. It's not going to happen. And we on the left have to make sure that it doesn't happen. And that means from the day Biden is elected, if he's elected, that we have to be on his case like white on rice.
You hear the dialectic, folks, between there's get rid of Trump and there's no Pollyanna scenario about changing poll numbers, so now we're all progressive or anything like that. There's a hell of a lot of work to do. I just want to really reiterate that.
Yes.
As a final question, I mean, actually, this is an easy one. I mean, do you think Biden will win? I know this
I only bet on sure things, Michael. You should know me by now.
I do. I know. I'm not asking you to take a bet, but I will. I mean, do you have?
I think he has a very good chance.
Yeah, very good chance.
I think he has a very good chance, in part because Trump is unraveling.
Right. Right.
Now, there's a number of things that could happen, including people could make the mistake they made in 2016 of assuming that Trump will be defeated and then stay home. A second thing that could happen are all kinds of electoral shenanigans. A third thing is that he might start a war. I mean, if he starts a war with Iran, for example, then you just don't know. This is one of those.
Right.
But I think at this point, I think Biden has a very good chance. And not only does Biden have a good chance, I think that there's a number of Republican senators that are in deep trouble.
The map could be looking pretty. I think that's true. I think if trends hold, there's going to be a lot of Democratic victories, and then the challenge just becomes different. Then people can finally fight with all these horrible neoliberals and third wayers that they've been wanting to fight with for years.
That's right.
Well, they'll finally be in power.
Well, listen, that's what you need to. You need to invite me back, because I think we should actually have a discussion about what that might look like.
I'd love that. It's always an honor and pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to many conversations and collaborations. And if you ever need anything from me, please let me know. And it's great fun to there's a group of whether it be Adolph Reed or you or Cornel West or even actually Noam Chomsky coming on the other week. It's an honor.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bill. Take care. Right. Be well.
You too. Take care.
You just watched a Michael Brooks Show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.